Welcome to Spiritual Storytelling, where we read stories from all around the world and talk about what they have to offer us when we're healing from the wounds of trauma and addiction. As always, if you like what you hear today, please leave a review or share with your friends. It really does go a long way and means the world to me. This is episode 5, The Skeleton Woman, Loving Ourselves When We Feel Unlovable. The Skeleton Woman is a story that was published in Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who says that it has been amplified into an original literary story from a short 5-line spoken poem given to her by Mary Ukalat. It takes place in an old Inuit setting. And just to keep in mind, it's a story about life and rebirth. And with that in mind, it might be a little scary for young listeners, so parental discretion is advised. She had done something of which her father disapproved, although no one any longer remembered what it was. But her father had dragged her to the cliffs and thrown her over into the sea. There, the fish ate her flesh away and plucked out her eyes. As she lay under the sea, her skeleton turned over and over in the currents. One day a fisherman came fishing. Well, in truth, many came to this bay once. But this fisherman had drifted far from his home place, and did not know that the local fishermen stayed away, saying that this inlet was haunted. The fisherman's hook drifted down through the water, and caught, of all places, in the bones of the skeleton woman's rib cage. The fisherman thought, "Oh, now I've really got a big one. Now I really have one." In his mind, he was thinking about how many people this great fish would feed, how long it would last, and how long he might be free from the chore of hunting. As he struggled with this great weight on the end of his hook, the sea was stirred to a thrashing froth, and his kayak bucked and shook, for she who was beneath struggled to disentangle herself. And the more she struggled, the more she tangled in the line. No matter what she did, she was inexorably dragged upwards, tugged up by the bones of her own ribs. The hunter had turned to scoop up his net, so he did not see her bald head rise above the waves. He did not see the little coral creatures glinting in the orbs of her skull. He did not see the crustaceans on her old ivory teeth. When he turned back with his net, her entire body, such as it was, had come to the surface and was hanging from the tip of his kayak by her long front teeth. "Ah!" cried the man, and his heart fell into his knees. His eyes hid in terror on the back of his head, and his ears blazed bright red. "Ah!" he screamed, and knocked her off the prow with his oar, and began paddling like a demon towards shoreline. And not realizing she was tangled in his line, he was frightened all the more, for she appeared to stand on her toes while chasing him all the way to shore. No matter which way he zigged his kayak, she stayed right behind, and her breath rolled over the water in clouds of steam, and her arms flailed out as though to snatch him down into the depths. "Ah!" he wailed as he ran around. In one leap, he was out of his kayak, clutching his fishing stick and running, and the coral white corpse of the skeleton woman, still snagged in the fishing line, bumpity-bumped right behind him. Over the rocks he ran, and she followed. Over the frozen tundra he ran, and she kept right up. Over the meat laid out to dry he ran, cracking it to pieces as his mollusk bore down. Throughout it all, she kept right up. In fact, she grabbed some of the frozen fish as she was dragged behind. This she began to eat, for she had not gorged in a long, long time. Finally, the man reached his snow house and dove right into the tunnel, and onto hands and knees scrabbled his way into the interior. Panting and sobbing, he lay there in the dark, his heart a drum, a mighty drum. Safe at last, oh so safe, yes, safe. Thank the gods, Raven, yes, thank Raven, yes, and all bountiful Sedna safe at last. Imagine when he lit his whale oil lamp, there she, it, lay in a tumble upon his snow floor, one heel over her shoulder, one knee inside her rib cage, one foot over her elbow. He could not say later what it was. Perhaps the firelight softened her features, or the fact that he was a lonely man. But he saw something human in her. A feeling of some kindness came into his breathing, and slowly he reached out his grimy hands and, using words softly like a mother to child, began to untangle her from the fishing line. Oh, na, 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 na. First he untangled the toes, and then the ankles. Oh, na, 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 na. On and on he worked into the night, until, dressing her in furs to keep her warm, skeleton woman's bones were all in the order a human's should be. He felt into his leather cuffs for his flint, and used some of his hair to light a little more fire. He gazed at her from time to time as he oiled the precious wood of his fishing stick and rewound the gut line. And she in the furs uttered not a word. She did not dare, lest this hunter take her out and throw her down onto the rocks and break her bones to pieces utterly. The man became drowsy and slid under his sleeping skins, and soon was dreaming. And sometimes, as humans sleep, you know, a tear escapes from the dreamer's eye. We never know what sort of dream causes this, but we know it is either a dream of sadness or longing, and this is what happened to the man. The skeleton woman saw the tear glistening in the firelight, and she suddenly became so thirsty. She tinkled and clanked and crawled over to the sleeping man and put her mouth to his tear. The single tear was like a river, and she drank and drank and drank until her many years-long thirst was slaked. Then, while lying beside him, she reached inside the sleeping man and took out his heart, the mighty drum. She sat up and banged both sides. Bum bum, bum bum. As she drummed, she began to sing out, "Flesh, flesh, 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 flesh." And the more she sang, the more her body filled out with flesh. She sang for hair and good eyes and nice fat hands. She sang the divide between her legs and breasts long enough to wrap for warmth and all the things a woman needs. And when she was done, she also sang the sleeping man's clothes off and crept into bed with him, skin against skin. She returned the great drum, his heart, to his body, and that is how they awakened, wrapped up around one another, tangled from their night together, in another way now, a good and lasting way. For people cannot remember how she came to her first ill fortune, say that she and the fisherman went away and were constantly well fed by the creatures she had known in her life underwater. The people say that it is true, and that is all they know. That is such a powerful story, guys. This is honestly one of my favorites. It's one that came to me at the right time and place in my journey, and it has stuck with me. So I'm really just thrilled to dive into this with you. There are several reasons why this story works. There's several different levels. So it touches on the idea of faith, compassion, and the life-death cycle that enfolds all of us. Estes beautifully uses this story to talk about romantic relationships and the ways in which we must accept death as a part of them. This is definitely work that needs to be done on the journey to wellness, but I want to tweak the focus a bit for our purposes here. When I read the story, I see a clear manifestation of self-love, especially for the addict. First, let's start with the fisherman. He's an archetype in all of us, so this is a man that is action-oriented. By default, he goes out into the world and takes care of the doing, trusting that the divine, or nature, if you'd rather, will take care of the rest. When we go fishing, in this sense, there's a certain amount of faith that is in place, a certain degree of trusting the process that has to happen. Sure, there are things you can do to better the odds, but this is true for anything. When we lean into action, we can do what we need to do and let the universe sort out the rest. When we get clean or sober, or ask for help, or break some sort of harmful cycle, we are spiritually fishing. We are casting out our line, having faith that our needs will be met. But sometimes we catch something unexpected. Estes calls this finding hidden treasure. I tend to call it rock bottom, but potato, potato. When we catch sight of something inhuman, something terrifying and decaying and uncomfortable in us, our first instinct is to run. We flee back to places that feel like home, hoping for safety from this new resurgence. Our perceptions are keeping us from seeing the true way out. Maybe this looks like going back to an ex or making contact with someone toxic, or in some cases even a relapse. Because before our excursion into the water, these things made us feel safe. But now, we have a whole ass animated skeleton lady flinging around and following us at breakneck speed, and that's a totally different thing altogether. So, run away as we might, she's caught now on the line that we threw out, tethered to us by our act of faith. We asked for our needs to be met, and instead we became haunted. So, as terrifying as it is, it turns out our faith was well placed. We've been given something so precious, so life-giving. We have summoned a power that we do not yet understand, but one that will become a crucial piece of our wholeness. When we come to see that this thing has followed us, it is natural to sob and shake, to be furious or terrified. But if we allow our breath to slow just a little and sit still for a couple moments, we might come to see something human in the terrifying image before us. We might see how bare it is, how agonizingly tangled it is. We might even see that she was not responsible for her current plight. We might, after a few breaths, find ourselves moved to kindness. And this is a moment of great healing. If we sit with our shadow, our pain, our flaws, and our fears long enough, we might come to see how human they are. We might come to understand that even the darkest and ugliest parts of us are deserving of kindness and compassion. And this is a revelation that makes running rather difficult. That doesn't mean that there isn't still fear, and that's okay. Fear and anxiety are important, and sometimes they can let us know that something crucial is happening and that we need to be paying attention. When I first faced off with all the things that disgusted me about myself and I had to find compassion, I was still angry and grieving and absolutely petrified. But that was not the place that I could move forward from. I couldn't turn my back on this pitiful thing out of hatred or fear or shame. The only thing that survived was that empathy, and it gave me a foundation of deep understanding that allowed for healing on a new level. And in my experience, this is not a face-off that you have to do only once. I'm really sorry to tell you. I'll have 4 years in recovery next month, and I am still casting my line, running from what haunts me, and gritting my teeth while I look at something in me that I've long denied. I'm still finding ways to cultivate empathy and compassion for myself. So know that this is a journey, a cycle, but I will say I promise it gets easier, deeper, and more rewarding with practice. Because when we're moved from fear and resentment into kindness and compassion, we can sing quietly to ourselves as we do the work to disentangle our bones. We can offer comfort to that traumatized piece of us and take action to surround it with warmth and protection. This might look like reaching out to a friend before we do the self-destructive thing, or finding new resources or habits for our healing. But we have to remember too that there's only so much action we can take to heal. Sometimes we must lay down and rest, trusting that these bones will be fleshed out one day, one way or another. We must understand that we can take all the action in the world, but if we don't let ourselves be in the process, if we don't lean into time to do its job, we're overexerting ourselves and often finding new places to hide from ourselves. When we have done the work to protect and comfort our wounded self, and then let our action-oriented self rest, a sacred space is created for healing to happen. So as we cultivate compassion and find a balance between action and rest, that wounded thing in us can then sing itself back to life. It can regenerate, taking what it needs to find wholeness, to find partnership with us. It can become something that works in alignment with us to meet our needs, instead of terrorizing us into spaces of neglect and lack. We can find all of ourselves working in harmony as we set out, day after day, to cast our line, waiting to see what the divine has in store for us. Remember, if you heard something helpful here today, don't forget to review or share this work. It means so much, and it makes this journey that much more fulfilling. And if you like our intro music, check out more by Esther Garcia Gonzalez. And as always, it is with deep love and gratitude that I want to thank you for listening to Spiritual Storytelling.